Hi everyone. Before we get into this audiobook, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit the subscribe button and drop a like. It helps me out a lot, as well as contributes a lot to the channel. Now, let's get into the story. I hope you enjoy. Lyric knelt beside the wounded wolf, her fingers gently exploring the jagged gash in its side. A pungent wave of iron and fear assaulted her senses, a familiar blend that was part and parcel of her life as the Blackwood Pack's healer. With a tender touch, bordering on reverence, she smoothed on the prepared salve, a potent concoction of roots and herbs celebrated for their restorative power. A low, mournful growl rumbled from the wolf, vibrating against her very core, and she soothed it with a soft, lilting murmur. Her movements were efficient, honed by years of experience, each gesture infused with a quiet, focused intensity. Healing was more than just a skill. It was her essence, inextricably woven into the fabric of her being. Yet, even as she tended the wolf's injury, a melancholic shadow darkened her eyes, a lingering sadness clinging to her like the damp earth after rainfall. The brand on her wrist pulsed, a ghost of agony echoing the deeper, internal wounds she carried. It was a tangible reminder of a bond forged, then brutally severed, a connection that defied oblivion despite distance and time, all thanks to the alpha who had turned her away. She squeezed her eyes shut, the memory surfacing with the clarity of broken glass. Moonlight had poured into the clearing, thick with unspoken expectations. Barely 18, she had stood before Kale, the alpha-to-be, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, a symphony of hope and apprehension. The elders' chants reverberated with ancient power as they initiated the ritual. An electric charge filled the space as Kale approached, his eyes, normally alight with warmth, now glacial and remote. He grasped her hand, an electric shock racing through her veins. Recognition, belonging. The mark blazed, a band of shimmering silver encircling her wrist, the physical manifestation of their union, the promise of a shared future. She searched his gaze, desperate to find the same connection, the same unwavering certainty that coursed through her. But there was nothing. Only a fleeting expression she couldn't quite grasp, something akin to remorse. He released her hand, the suddenness of the action staggering her. The chanting faltered, the atmosphere in the clearing shifting from anticipation to disquiet. Kale retreated, his voice monotone, devoid of feeling, as he delivered the words that would forever alter her destiny. "I reject this bond." The statement hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The silver brand on her wrist seared, the agonizing pain a tangible reflection of the emotional injury he had inflicted. She gaped at him, struggling to comprehend the situation, her mind unable to reconcile the Kale she knew with the frigid, apathetic stranger before her. Whispers rippled through the elders, their faces etched with disapproval. Rejection was unheard of, a violation of sacred tradition, a blight upon the pack's honor. She had tried to dissuade him, to reason, to understand his motives. Later, in private, she had begged him to reconsider. "Kale, please," she'd pleaded, her voice ragged with unshed tears. "Tell me why. What have I done?" He'd averted his gaze, his jaw clenched, his focus on the distant horizon. "It's not you, Lyric," he'd said, his voice strained and distant. "It's complicated. I can't explain." His refusal to elaborate, his curt dismissal, had been the final, crushing blow. Soon after, she had left Blackwood, unable to endure the whispers, the pitying stares, the constant, painful reminder of her fractured bond. Lyric finished securing the bandage on the wolf's wound, her hands moving mechanically. She rose, her gaze sweeping across Blackwood's territory, a sprawling expanse of dense woodland that had become her refuge. She had fashioned a life here, a serene, solitary existence devoted to healing and service. She had learned to manage the agony, to suppress the memories, to fortify her heart. But the mark remained, a perpetual echo of a past she could never truly outrun. Later, as she prepared her evening repast, fragments of conversation drifted from a group of pack members huddled around the communal fire. Their voices were hushed, their expressions worried. "Have you received any news from the Northern Ridge Pack?" a young woman questioned, her tone barely audible. "Only rumors," a man responded, his brow deeply furrowed. "Strange happenings, livestock vanishing, unsettling howls piercing the night. Some claim a darkness is spreading through their territory." "Alpha Theron seems to have lost his grip," another woman added. "He's always been temperamental, but it's worsening. There are murmurs of rogue wolves, of forbidden magic being unleashed." Lyric paused, her hands suspended above the simmering stew. The Northern Ridge Pack. Kale's pack. A chill of apprehension snaked through her, a foreboding sense of impending doom. She attempted to dismiss it, to convince herself it was merely pack gossip, but the unease persisted, a knot tightening in her core. She knew Kale, or, at least, she believed she had. He was strong, capable, fiercely dedicated to his pack's well-being. The thought of him losing control, of his territory imperiled, caused a shiver to run down her spine. Years had passed since their last encounter, years she had actively avoided thinking of him. Yet the bond, however fractured, lingered. And with it, a lingering sense of obligation she couldn't ignore. Elara Blackwood, the pack's beta and Lyric's closest friend, approached, her gaze sharp and probing. Elara was not one for superfluous words, but her gaze could pierce any guise. "You're troubled," she stated, her voice low and direct. Lyric sighed, setting down the stirring spoon. "I overheard the talk about Northern Ridge. It sounds ominous." "It is," Elara concurred. "Alpha Theron is struggling. There are whispers of an affliction, a rot consuming his pack. He has requested assistance from other packs, including ours." Lyric's heart skipped a beat. "And what was Alpha Gregor's decision?" "He's considering it," Elara replied, her expression somber. "Northern Ridge is a formidable pack, a valuable ally. But deploying warriors into a situation like this, it's a gamble, a significant gamble." Lyric understood the unspoken implication. If Alpha Gregor elected to send aid, she, as the pack's healer, would be expected to accompany them. She would be forced to confront Kale, to re-engage with a past she had desperately tried to bury. "You don't have to volunteer, understand?" Elara said, her voice gentling slightly. "I can speak to Gregor, inform him you are indispensable here." Lyric shook her head. "I can't ask you to do that, Elara. It's my responsibility. If others are suffering, I must assist." Elara studied her intently, her gaze unwavering. "You possess greater resilience than you give yourself credit for, Lyric. But do not let compassion cloud your judgment. Remember what transpired. Remember Kale's rejection." Lyric squeezed her eyes shut, the anguish of that memory still stinging, still vivid. "I have not forgotten," she whispered. "I never will." Elara placed a hand on her shoulder, her touch grounding and reassuring. "Then proceed with caution. Protect yourself. And do not allow him to break you again." Lyric nodded, her gaze firming. She would travel to Northern Ridge. She would aid those in need. But she would not be the same innocent girl who had stood in that clearing, brimming with hope and trust. She was stronger now, more resolute. The mark on her wrist might be indelible, but her heart was no longer defenseless. She would face Kale, not as the rejected mate, but as a healer, a warrior, a survivor. And she would not grant him the satisfaction of witnessing the depth of her wounds. The shadows of the past would not drown her. She would ignite her own flame, chart her own destiny. A desperate plea, a subtle, almost invisible tremor racked Bram's hand, but Kale caught it. The boy's once vibrant eyes were now glazed, overlaid with a peculiar, empty sheen. This blight was spreading, this encroaching darkness sapping the vigor of his pack. Initial reports, dismissed as common winter ailments, now revealed themselves as something far more sinister. A creeping dread pulsed through Kale. He gripped Bram's shoulder, a gesture meant to steady the boy, though Kale felt far from steady himself. "Bram, look at me. Can you understand me?" The boy blinked, his gaze darting haphazardly before snagging, blank, on Kale's face. "Alpha, I feel unwell." The words rasped, thin and strained. A shard of icy fear pierced Kale's resolve. He had to intervene. He had to uncover the source. Later, under the weak lamplight of the meeting hall, Kale presented the grim reality to his inner circle. Torrin Stone, his lifelong companion and most valued advisor, listened, his jaw set in a hard line. "It's accelerating," Kale finished, his tone weighted with despair. 3 more have manifested similar symptoms in the last 48 hours. The healers, they're stumped. They claim it defies anything they've witnessed. Torrin stroked his beard, brow deeply furrowed. Perhaps a renegade sorcerer? Some nefarious enchantment? Kale refuted the idea with a shake of his head. The healers tested for magical signatures. Nothing registers. It's insidious, as if their vital essence is being drained away. He faltered, the next words tasting like ash. He knew the course of action, yet the notion curdled in his gut. Only one avenue remains. We must solicit outside assistance. A low rumble of dissent echoed through the room. Torrin's gaze narrowed. Outside assistance? Kale, respectfully. We are the Northern Ridge Pack. We resolve our own predicaments. And we're failing Torrin. Our healers are powerless to stop this. Our strongest warriors are being enfeebled. Pride will be our peopled. Downfall if we allow it. Kale's voice escalated, edged with exasperation and desperation. He loathed the position this put him in, the raw exposure, the confession of his own shortcomings. Torrin rose, his features etched with disapproval. There are other packs, Kale, clans willing to extend a hand without strings attached. Kale locked eyes with him, his jaw clenched. You know the Blackwood Pack offers our best hope. Their healer lyric possesses unrivaled skill in this territory. The legends are well known. Torrin's expression hardened into stone. Lyric, you'd seek aid from her, after all that transpired. The air in the hall seemed to grow thick, the unspoken history hanging palpably between them. Kale winced inwardly, the memory of that night, of her rejection, still a raw wound. But the images of the afflicted, of Bram's glazed eyes, propelled him onward. I have no alternative, Torrin. My pack perishes. I will swallow my pride. I will plead if necessary. I will exhaust every option to preserve them. Torrin remained mute for a protracted moment, his gaze unwavering. Finally, a sigh escaped him, the resistance melting away. Then proceed, but be forewarned, Kale. Some scars never truly mend, and reopening them could exact a greater toll than you imagine. The journey to the Blackwood Pack border blurred into a maelstrom of anxious thoughts and sharp pangs of guilt. Cale rode relentlessly, the wind lashing his face, an apt reflection of the storm within. He envisioned Lyric, her face imprinted with anguish, her eyes blazing with the recollection of his betrayal. He had wounded her deeply, shattered the budding connection, all for the expediency of politics, for the lure of a sturdier alliance. And now, years later, he returned, humbled, seeking her mercy. The irony stung like acid. Reaching the boundary, marked by a colossal oak adorned with the Blackwood Pack sigil, he decelerated. He sensed eyes upon him, the watchful scrutiny of the border sentinels. He dismounted, his hand hovering near his sword hilt, a gesture of peace, of deference. He stood erect, in spite of the shame threatening to engulf him, and waited. The air vibrated with tension, heavy with his past and the ambiguous future. He was Alpha Cale Ironwood, leader of the Northern Ridge Pack, and he stood at their discretion. A figure materialized from the shadowed wood, movements as fluid as smoke. A woman, her face obscured by the deep cowl of her cloak. She halted a few paces away, radiating an aura of restrained power. "State your name and intent," she demanded, her voice cool and impersonal. Cale swallowed, his throat suddenly parched. "I am Cale Ironwood, Alpha of the Northern Ridge Pack. I petition for assistance." He maintained a steady tone, concealing the fear and despair gnawing at him. The woman tilted her head, scrutinizing him with an intensity that unsettled him. "And why should the Blackwood Pack extend succor, Alpha Ironwood, particularly following your past indiscretions?" Cale met her gaze, his expression resolute. "My pack is gripped by a peculiar illness. Our healers are helpless. I have exhausted all other avenues. I concede I have forfeited any claim to ask, but I implore you, please, offer us your aid." He loathed the sound of those words, the exposed vulnerability, but he forced himself to utter them, to humble himself. The woman stood silent for a long count, her expression an enigma. Finally she spoke, her voice almost inaudible. "Await here. I shall relay your request to the healer." With that, she pivoted and vanished back into the shadows, leaving Cale alone with his thoughts, the weight of his past bearing down, crushing and relentless. The shadows seemed to lengthen, to grasp and envelop him, a bone-chilling reminder of the darkness consuming his pack and the darkness lurking within his own soul. He closed his eyes, bracing for whatever awaited him, knowing any punishment was deserved. He could only hope Lyric would find the compassion to forgive him, not for his sake, but for the good of his people. Ghosts of the past, the reek of resin and loam followed Cale like a shadow, a far cry from the saccharine airs of the Blackwood territory. Lyric leaned against her cottage doorway, the setting sun painting elongated shapes across the weathered porch boards. He appeared aged, faint lines webbed at the corners of his eyes, echoing the deep-set lines of regret that scored her own spirit. "Lyric," he rasped, the syllable catching in his throat. Silence was her only reply, a refusal. His utterance of her name, after such a long silence, was a phantom she believed she'd exorcised. Her grip tightened on the doorframe, the rough timber a grounding force against the swirling vortex of reminiscences. He edged forward, and she flinched back, a skittishness betraying her carefully constructed composure. "I know I forfeit any right to request this of you," he muttered, eyes fixed on the ground, unable to sustain her gaze. "But my Pakea sickness grips them. We're losing them fast, and our healers are baffled." Indifference, perhaps a cruel satisfaction, should have been her response. Yet, the stark desperation contorting his features, his exposed vulnerability, ignited an unwelcome ember within her. Relentless empathy refused to be quenched. "And you presume I possess a solution?" she inquired at last, her voice a frigid, polished thing, a mask honed by years of solitude. He finally lifted his gaze, stormy gray eyes locking with hers. "You always had a talent, an innate understanding of the body, a sensitivity to imbalances invisible to others." A mirthless sound rattled from her throat. "A talent you clearly prized so little." The ensuing quiet throbbed with unspoken grievances, with unspoken indictments. He shifted uncomfortably, his broad frame seeming to diminish under the weight of her scrutiny. "Lyric, He started, then faltered, seeking the magic incantation that could rewrite history. "Spare me," she snapped, her voice like honed steel. "Don't insult my intelligence with vapid apologies. Just articulate your need." He recoiled, the naked pain in his expression a cruel echo of the man she had once adored. The man she had been foolish enough to assume reciprocated her affections. "My Paka, they're succumbing," he breathed, a mere whisper. "Please, Lyric, I'm pleading." The word hung between them, an admission of his desperation, the depth of his plight. Cale Ironwood, Alpha of Northern Ridge, abasing himself. It was a tableau she never imagined witnessing. She shut her eyes, battling the tide of memories threatening to engulf her. The memory of his touch, the warmth of his skin, the honeyed words turned to ash. And then, the searing sting of his dismissal, the devastating finality of his pronouncements. "Why seek me out now, Cale?" she questioned, her voice trembling regardless of her efforts to steady it. "Why seek me out after all this time? After demonstrating so clearly that I was deficient, unworthy of becoming your Luna." He remained mute, head bowed in a tableau of contrition. "Answer me," she demanded, her tone escalating. "What purpose does this serve?" He finally met her stare, his own eyes mirroring her inner torment. "Because I was an utter fool," he confessed, his tone raw with self-disgust. "A blinded, arrogant fool who allowed apprehension and obligation to corrupt my judgment. I committed an error, Lyric, the gravest error of my existence. And now, my pack stands to pay for my folly." "And you truly believe your presence here, groveling before me, will somehow absolve you of that blunder?" she challenged, dripping with sarcasm. "That it will magically eradicate the anguish you inflicted, the years I devoted to obliterating you from my memory?" "No," he stated, his voice resolute. "I don't anticipate your forgiveness. I don't warrant it. I'm simply asking for your assistance, not for my benefit, but for theirs. They're innocent, Lyric. They shouldn't suffer because of my idiocy." She spun away, pacing the cramped space of her cottage, her thoughts a tempest of conflicting impulses. Fury, rancor, a persistent ache of attachment, and that unyielding empathy that prevented her from turning her back on suffering. "What do you require of me?" she eventually asked, her voice tinged with resignation. His head snapped up, a sliver of hope illuminating his features. "Return to Northern Ridge, examine the afflicted, endeavor to discover a remedy." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Return? To the site of my rejection, where I was made to feel extraneous? Your desperation must exceed even my estimation." "I realize it's an imposing request," he said, pleading etched into his voice. "But I find myself at a loss. Every avenue explored has led to a dead end." She ceased her pacing, facing him, her eyes narrowed to slits. "Very well," she stated, her voice cold and inflexible. I will offer my aid, but under stipulations dictated by me." His relief was almost tangible, but she raised a hand to forestall his words. "This constitutes a strictly pragmatic arrangement, Kale. I will journey to Northern Ridge, I will diagnose your afflicted, and I will exert every effort to discover a cure. That alone. Expect no apologies, no justifications, no endeavors to resurrect the ashes of what once existed. Our past is defunct, Kale. Leave it undisturbed." He nodded slowly, his eyes brimming with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. "I comprehend." "Excellent," she said, her voice dismissive. "I'll need a comprehensive report of the symptoms, the identities of the affected individuals, and entry to all assets your healers have previously employed, and guarantees that my well-being will be ensured." "You possess my guarantee," he asserted, his voice strong. "No harm will befall you." "See to it that none does," she retorted, her gaze unwavering. "Because should they, our agreement ceases, and your pack will be left to their own fate." She paused, letting her words settle. "I depart at dawn. Be prepared." With that, she turned and vanished into the interior of her dwelling, leaving Kale standing alone in the encroaching shadows, the spirits of their shared past whirling around him like an icy draft. The mark on her wrist, the emblem of their connection, throbbed faintly, a subtle reminder of a bond that refused to be fully severed despite years of hurt and disillusionment. A bond he had rashly broken, and now desperately needed to repair. Whispers of shadows of frigid air, far beyond autumn's usual bite, clawed at them as they pressed further into the northern ridge. The unnatural cold sank into their very marrow, prickling their skin despite their thick cloaks. Lyric trailed a gloved hand across an oak's trunk, once teeming with life, now scarred by a creeping ebony rot that devoured its essence. The tree's leaves, clinging tenuously to their branches, shattered like stale bread at the lightest touch. "This isn't a mere blight," she whispered, her voice strained. "This is intentional." Kale's jaw tightened as he took in the surrounding devastation. The vibrant hues of the forest were now faded, coated in a sickly ashen film. The familiar woodland chorus leaves whispering secrets, birdsong painting the air was gone, replaced by a heavy, unnerving quiet that seemed to suffocate them. "Intentional how?" he questioned, his voice a low rumble. He knew this land intimately, its every contour, every babbling brook, every tangled undergrowth. To see it defiled like this was akin to a physical blow. Lyric knelt, her fingers tracing patterns in the barren soil. It lacked all moisture, all life, devoid of any earthy fragrance. She scooped up a handful, the grit running through her fingers like funerary ash. "Nothing natural could cause this. The ground itself is poisoned. Something is draining its lifeblood." Her grave gaze locked with Kale's. "We're facing something darker than I initially surmised." They continued their grim trek, following the swath of decay that gouged its way deeper into the woods. The shadows ahead seemed to deepen and stretch, despite the sun's position high in the firmament. A constricting pressure settled on Lyric's chest, a prickling unease that crawled along her spine. She felt a malevolent presence, lurking just beyond the veil of perception. They reached the edge of a clearing, where the corruption reached its zenith. The grasses were brown and shriveled, the trees reduced to skeletal remains, and the air thrummed with a cloying, saccharine stench. At the clearing's heart stood a neglected cabin, its windows sealed, roof caving in. Abandoned years ago, it was shunned by the pack due to whispers of ill fortune. Kale had forbidden anyone from approaching, not wishing to fuel old wives' tales. But now, gazing upon it, A coil of dread constricted his gut. "This place," Cale began, his voice rough. "It's always evoked a dark feeling." "That feeling is valid," Lyric replied, her voice barely audible. "The source of the rot is here." They approached with utmost caution, senses keenly attuned. As they neared, a figure materialized from the shadows, his face ashen and gaunt, eyes wide with terror. It was Jaren, a young pack member. "Alpha Cale," Jaren stammered, his voice trembling. "Lyric, I didn't expect to find you here." "Jaren, what are you doing here?" Cale demanded, his tone sharp. "I ordered everyone to avoid this place." Jaren flinched, his eyes darting nervously. I couldn't find sleep. I've been plagued by dreams, horrifying dreams. And I felt drawn here, as if something was beckoning me." "Dreams?" Lyric inquired, her voice gentle. "What visions haunt you?" Jaren hesitated, his gaze flitting between Lyric and Cale. He seemed torn between raw fear and an urgent need to confide in someone, anyone. "I see shadows, twisting, writhing shadows that swallow everything whole. They mutter terrible things, and when I awaken, I feel empty, as if my life force has been stolen." Cale stepped forward, resting a reassuring hand on Jaren's shoulder. "Tell me all," he urged, his voice firm, yet comforting. "Omit nothing." Jaren drew a ragged breath and began to recount his nightmares, his voice gaining strength with each word. He described the shadows in stark detail, their fluid, shape-shifting forms, their whispers scraping at his sanity. He spoke of a deepening sense of impending doom, a conviction that something awful was about to break free. "It feels like something is awakening," he concluded, his voice a mere ghost of a whisper. "Something ancient and profoundly evil." Lyric listened with focused intensity, her brow furrowed. Jaren's account amplified her own mounting apprehension. The shadows he depicted were not of this world, but something more, something imbued with a virulent, malignant energy. "Have you witnessed anything else?" she probed. "Anything that might shed light on what is occurring?" Jaren shook his head, his eyes wide and haunted. "No, only the shadows, and the constant feeling that I'm being watched." He shivered uncontrollably, despite his layered clothing. "I must escape this place," he pleaded, his voice barely audible. "It is cursed." Cale nodded, empathy etched on his face. "Return to the pack house, Jaren. Rest. I'll ensure your protection." Jaren didn't require further prompting. He spun and fled, disappearing into the trees with a speed fueled by pure terror. Cale watched him depart, his expression troubled. "His terror is authentic," he stated, turning to Lyric. "And I believe his account." "As do I," Lyric concurred, her gaze pinned to the crumbling cabin. "Something is profoundly wrong here, and I suspect the answers lie within." They approached the structure, Cale taking the lead. With a groan, he forced open the door, revealing a dark, stagnant interior. Dust motes danced in the faint light, carrying the reek of decay. Cobwebs hung like funerary shrouds from the rafters, and the floorboards complained beneath their weight. Lyric held her breath, attempting to detect lingering traces of magic. The air was heavy, thick with a dark energy that made her skin crawl. She sensed remnants of something old and powerful, dormant for eons, but now in the throes of awakening. She ventured deeper into the cabin, her eyes darting about the room. The furniture was shattered and rotting, cloaked in a thick layer of grime. A threadbare rug lay discarded on the floor, its colors faded and obscured by dirt. In one corner, a pile of debris had been pushed aside, revealing a section of newly exposed floorboards. Lyric knelt, examining the bare wood. Etched into the surface was a symbol, a web of interlocking circles and lines forming a disturbing, intricate design. It was unlike anything she had encountered before. "Cale," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Look." Cale joined her, his gaze fixed on the strange symbol. His brow furrowed as he struggled to decipher its meaning. He recognized it, a perverted version of an ancient ward, meant to guard against dark magic, now twisted into something sinister. "I've seen this before," he murmured, his voice laced with dread. "In ancient texts, it's a sigil of corruption, a marker of shadow magic." Lyric's heart plunged. Shadow magic, a perilous and forbidden art, drew its power from the human soul's darkest recesses. It was capable of corrupting all it touched, warping the natural order. "This changes everything," she said, her voice grave. "We're not facing some natural sickness, Cale. We're dealing with something far more threatening." The phantom ache on her wrist intensified, a lingering echo of a broken bond, now eclipsed by the looming peril. The past, she sensed with a shiver, had not been laid to rest. It had simply been lurking in the shadows, patiently waiting to rise and claim them. Echoes of rejection, the twisted sigil throbbed with abyssal energy, a stark contrast to the diluted sunlight seeping through the cabin's begrimed panes. A chill, older than the blight itself, wormed its way up Lyric's spine as she gazed at it, a ghost from a past she'd desperately striven to enter. Cale. Her vision swam, the symbol morphing into a searing memory. A slip of a girl, barely 16, she had been brimming with incandescent naivete. Cale, a year her senior, stood beside her at the brink of Whispering Falls, their carefree laughter bouncing off the venerable trees. More than simply a friend, he was her confidant, an intrinsic part of her being, or so she had foolishly convinced herself. "Someday, Leary," he vowed, his gaze the color of rain-kissed moss, "we'll guide this pack, together." They envisioned a future where their unbreakable bond formed the cornerstone of their leadership, a living embodiment of love and unwavering fealty. A childish compact, sealed with clasped hands and the simple faith in forever. The idyllic tableau fractured, giving way to another. Cale's coronation. The pack assembled in the moon-drenched clearing, their faces a tapestry of expectation. He stood erect, regal even in youth, accepting the alpha's mantle. A palpable anxiety permeated the air, the weight of tradition pressing down on every watching wolf. Old Man Hemlock, the pack's weathered elder, his voice a gravelly rasp of authority, spoke to Cale. "An alpha requires a Luna, Cale Ironwood, one who brings strength, lineage, and stability to the pack, one who grasps the burden of command, the necessity of difficult calls." Lyric, positioned at the edge of the throng, witnessed a brief struggle in Cale's features, a clenching of his jaw. His gaze flickered towards her, a fleeting expression of longing. Regret? Too swift to interpret. Later, bathed in lunar silver, she offered herself to him, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The claiming ceremony was a hallowed rite, a moment of intense vulnerability and untamed connection. She presented her wrist, the skin there alive with anticipation, ready to bear his mark, to fuse their very essence. He clasped her hand, a jolt of electricity coursing through her. But then, his eyes became glacial, his grip tight, not in loving acceptance, but agonizing denial. "I can't, Lyric," he breathed, his voice a mirror reflecting her own agony. My duty is to the pack. I have to choose someone suitable. His words struck like crystalline daggers, shattering the precious fantasies they had nurtured. He had settled on Elara Thorne, a distant relation of hers, yet a scion of a prominent and politically influential lineage. Elara possessed the qualities Lyric lacked: status, affluence, and the unyielding endorsement of the pack's leaders. Elara, with her frigid stare and calculating smirk. Elara, who saw Lyric as an inconvenience to be swept away. The memory dissolved into another, more recent, more raw. 2 years post-coronation. Driven to demonstrate her worth, to prove that their connection surpassed societal constraints, Lyric had challenged his choice. She had trained relentlessly, honing her abilities, pushing past every limit, determined to prove herself worthy, not of their approval, but of his affections. She confronted him on the training grounds, under the pitiless gaze of the midday sun. "Give me a chance, Kale," she implored, her voice trembling with hope and defiance. "Let me show you that I am powerful enough, that our bond is valid." He studied her, his face an unreadable mask of stoicism. They clashed, a brutal dance of prowess and skill. She pressed him, tested him, compelling him to acknowledge her might. For a fleeting instant, she thought she caught a glimmer of recognition, a ghost of the boy she once adored. But then, the mask settled back, his resolve solidifying. He defeated her, pinning her, his weight smothering her spirit. "It's not enough, Lyric," he stated, his voice devoid of all emotion. "You're strong, yes, but you fail to comprehend the sacrifices I am required to make. The pack's needs outweigh all." The refusal was complete, unyielding. It echoed through her essence, leaving an open wound. The mark upon her wrist, the enduring symbol of their kinship, felt like a searing brand, a constant reminder of her defeat, of his devastating choice. She abandoned the pack soon after, unable to endure the incessant reminder of her profound loss. She found sanctuary in a remote hamlet, immersing herself in healing, trying to erase the memory of the boy who had once been her world. Lyric blinked, the recollection fading, the present crashing down with jarring force. The sigil still pulsed, a sinister reminder that the past remained a living entity. It had pursued her, a persistent shadow, corrupting her present, endangering her future. And now, Kale was here, entreating her aid, forcing her to confront the anguish she had so painstakingly suppressed. Jaren whimpered, jerking Lyric back to the present. It's intensifying," he choked out, his eyes dilated with terror, riveted on the sigil. "The nightmares, they're worsening." Kale moved closer, his face grim. "We must obliterate it," he said, his voice strained with resolve, "before it consumes us all." He met Lyric's gaze, his eyes pleading, a wordless acknowledgement of their shared history, the wounds he had inflicted. "Can you do it?" Lyric hesitated, her heart a battleground of conflicting emotions. Could she place her faith in him? Could she trust her own judgment? The brand on her wrist throbbed, a persistent reminder of their unbreakable connection, despite all his prior actions. She studied Kale, the burden of leadership etched upon his face. He required her. They all did. "Yes," she confirmed, her voice unwavering, concealing her inner turmoil. "But it won't be easy." The long shadows of the past hung heavy, threatening to overwhelm them all. Yet, within that darkness, a faint flicker of hope persisted, a chance at recompense, a possibility, however tenuous, of healing. The witch's mark Bryn's aged hands, gnarled like ancient tree roots, hovered over the unconscious wolf, her brow furrowed with concern. This is no ordinary sickness, Lyric. This is the touch of Morwen. The name fell like a shard of ice in the already tense air. Lyric felt a jolt, a primal fear coiling in her stomach. Morwen, a name whispered in hushed tones, a legend of dark magic and bitter vengeance. Morwen is just a story, Bryn, a cautionary tale. Some stories are born from truth, child. I recognize her craft, the shadows clinging to his fur, the unnatural stillness she feeds on life force, twisting it to her will. Bryn's gaze hardened. And she's grown strong. Kale, who had been pacing restlessly, stopped abruptly. Morwen? The witch they banished from the Silver Creek Coven centuries ago? She's been dead for generations. Bryn shook her head slowly. Magic like hers doesn't simply fade. It festers, waits for a weakness to exploit. And I fear she's found one. She looked pointedly at the mark on Lyric's wrist, the brand of the rejected bond with Kale, now shimmering with an unnatural darkness. Lyric instinctively covered the mark, a wave of shame and anger washing over her. That's absurd. Our bond has nothing to do with this. But even as she spoke, doubt gnawed at her. The shadows seemed to writhe, drawn to the mark's faint glow. Kale's jaw tightened. He knew the truth echoed in Bryn's words, a truth he had desperately tried to ignore. What do we do? His voice was low, laced with a vulnerability Lyric hadn't heard in years. We need to understand her motives, her power source. The old texts, the Blackwood archives. They may hold the key to stopping her. Bryn's eyes held a glimmer of hope, but also a profound weariness. This will not be easy. Morwen was cunning, even in life. She will not surrender her power willingly. The Blackwood archives were a labyrinth of ancient scrolls and crumbling tomes, their pages filled with forgotten lore and forbidden knowledge. Lyric and Kale worked tirelessly, fueled by strong coffee and a growing sense of dread. The air hung heavy with the scent of dust and decay, the silence broken only by the rustling of parchment and the frantic scribbling of notes. Look at this, Lyric said, her voice hushed, pointing to a faded passage in a leather-bound book. Morwen, she was betrothed to the alpha of the Silver Creek Pack, but he rejected her, choosing another. Sound familiar? Kale's face darkened. She sought revenge, used dark magic to curse the pack, to make them suffer as she had suffered. But she was stopped, Lyric countered, flipping through the pages. The coven banished her, stripped her of her power. Or so they thought. Another passage caught Lyric's eye. It says here that Morwen drew her strength from fractured bonds, from pain and betrayal. She could amplify negative emotions, turning them into raw power. Lyric's gaze drifted to Kale, her heart aching with a familiar mix of anger and longing. She needs a conduit, a source. Kale slammed his fist on the table, the sound echoing through the silent chamber. The pack. She's using the pack's fear, their illness, and our history to fuel her magic. He looked at Lyric, his eyes filled with regret. I never wanted this, Lyric. Never wanted to hurt you. Lyric turned away, unable to meet his gaze. It doesn't matter what you wanted, Kale. What matters is stopping her. Before it's too late. As they delved deeper into the texts, the shadows outside seemed to grow darker, more menacing. A low growl echoed from the courtyard, followed by a chilling scream. They rushed outside, their hearts pounding in their chests. Standing in the center of the courtyard was a wolf, its eyes glowing with an unnatural red light, its fur matted and twisted. It was snarling, its teeth bared, its body trembling with a dark res. Energy. That's Tauren, Kale whispered, his voice filled with horror. He wouldn't attack us. The wolf lunged, its claws extended, its snarl turning into a guttural roar. Kale shifted, his own wolf form emerging, his eyes blazing with protective fury. They clashed, a whirlwind of fur and teeth, the air thick with the scent of blood and rage. Lyric knew they couldn't hurt Tauren. He was possessed, a puppet controlled by Morwin's dark magic. She had to find a way to break the connection, to free him from her grasp. She closed her eyes, focusing her energy, reaching out to Tauren's mind. She could feel Morwin's presence, a cold, malignant force that sought to crush her will. "Leave him alone, witch!" Lyric cried, her voice echoing through the courtyard. "He's done nothing to you." A voice, cold and mocking, echoed in her mind. "He belongs to me now, as will you all." The shadows intensified, swirling around Tauren, engulfing him in darkness. He howled in pain, a sound that tore at Lyric's heart. She had to act, before Morwin consumed him completely. Lyric charged forward, drawing on her own inner strength, her own magic. She reached out to Tauren, not with force, but with compassion, with a desperate plea for him to fight back. "Tauren, you're stronger than this. You have to break free." For a moment, she felt a flicker of recognition in his eyes, a spark of the wolf he once was. Then, the shadows tightened their grip, and the light was gone. The possessed wolf lunged again, its attack fiercer, more relentless than before. Kale struggled to defend himself, his own strength waning. Lyric knew they were running out of time. They had to find a way to defeat Morwin, to sever her connection to the pack, before she destroyed them all. And she had a chilling premonition that the answer lay not just in ancient texts, but within herself, entwined with the very bond she had tried so hard to bury. The bond with Kale. Amplified healing Lyric's frustration constricted her chest like a vise. A sheen glazed her forehead as she pressed her palms against Kerr. Ilara's scorching skin, murmuring the age-old healing cadences her grandmother had imparted. The pup, typically a whirlwind of playful energy, was unnervingly still, her breath coming in raspy gasps. A clinging darkness, thick as crude oil, resisted Lyric's magic with unnerving force. Hours she'd labored, channeling her strength into the young wolf, yet the sickness clung with grim determination. "It's futile," she choked out, retracting her hands. The air hummed with depleted energy, carrying a faint, metallic tang. She stole a glance at Kale, who stood sentry by the doorway, his face a mask of worry. He seemed burdened beyond his years, the weight of his pack etched onto his features. His usually keen eyes met hers, now begging with raw desperation. "There has to be something, Lyric, anything we've missed." Lyric shook her head, a lump rising in her throat. "I'm giving it everything I have." It's as if something is actively pushing back. She hated the creeping helplessness, the unwelcome reminder of past failures resonating within her. All the progress she'd made, all the skills sharpened, felt meaningless now, casting her back to a powerless youth facing an impossible challenge. Turning away, she roamed the confined space, her fingers absently tracing the faint scar on her wrist, the ghost of a bond she had once shared with Kale, a connection he had severed, not once, but twice. It throbbed faintly, a spectral echo, refusing to completely dissipate. A mirthless sound scraped past her lips. Even in this dire moment, fate possessed a mordant sense of humor. "Damn it all," she rasped, slamming a fist against the rough timbers of the wall. Cale recoiled at the sharp report, his expression softening with what might have been guilt. He started forward, hand extended, then retreated as if stung. "Lyric?" "Pleasey." The rest remained unspoken. She understood the sentiment, don't shoulder the blame, don't tax yourself beyond endurance. Hollow solace from a man who had never grasped the depth of her being. "Please what, Cale?" she demanded, spinning to confront him, her eyes blazing with suppressed emotion. "Please not feel? Not care? Not strive to rescue your precious pack?" His jaw clenched, his gaze hardening in response. "That's unfair, Lyric. You know I care deeply for them." "Do I, truly?" she challenged, closing the distance between them, invading his personal space. The atmosphere vibrated with unsaid words, with years of buried hurts and unacknowledged desires. "Because all I perceive is a man who made a decision that extracted a terrible price from both of us." He flinched as if struck, the truth of her words landing with physical force. He opened his mouth, prepared to defend his actions, yet no sound emerged. He simply stood there, his eyes reflecting a torment that mirrored her own. A small, pitiable whimper from Ilara sliced through the charged silence like a shard of glass. Lyric's anger evaporated, supplanted by a tidal wave of protectiveness. She hurried back to the pup's side, hovering her hands over her frail form. "I'm so sorry, Ilara," she whispered, her voice softening with tenderness. "I refuse to fail you." Desperation gnawed at her. She had to attempt something, anything. She closed her eyes, focusing every ounce of her energy, every fiber of her being, into a singular, unwavering point. She envisioned the shadows as a palpable entity, a stifling, impenetrable cloud, and pictured her magic as a beacon of pure, cleansing luminescence. She reached out, her fingertips grazing Cale's arm as she leaned closer to Ilara. And then, everything detonated. A surge of raw, untamed power flooded through her, almost buckling her knees. The mark seared into her wrist blazed with unbearable heat, and the very air around her crackled with unleashed force. She gasped, her vision fracturing, as the energy poured from her, engulfing Ilara's body. The shadows writhed and recoiled, shrieking as if scorched, and for the first time since the onset of this ordeal, Lyric glimpsed a glimmer of possibility. Ilara's breathing grew more regular, her fever subsided, and a fragile blush returned to her pallid cheeks. Lyric staggered back, her legs unsteady, her body trembling uncontrollably. She looked at Cale, his eyes wide with stunned disbelief. What was that?" he managed, his voice barely audible. Lyric had no answer. All she knew was that something had shifted. A latent potential had been awakened. She glanced down at her wrist, at the mark that served as a constant memento of his rejection, and regarded it with newfound understanding. It transcended mere pain and loss. It was a conduit, a reservoir of untapped might. The connection she had stubbornly denied, the bond she had presumed shattered beyond repair, persisted, throbbing with a life force of its own. And somehow, inexplicably, it was the linchpin to saving them all. Days dissolved into a blur of hectic experimentation and enervating exertion. With Ilara's condition stabilized but still precarious, Lyric dedicated herself to deciphering the surge of power she had experienced. Sequestered from the pack's watchful eyes, deep within the forest's embrace, she practiced, channeling her energy, striving to replicate the effect. She envisioned Cale, the feel of his skin, the lingering memory of their entwined souls, and each time, the mark responded, its heat intensifying, its pulse quickening. As she delved deeper, she recognized the breadth of their connection. It wasn't merely an amplifier for healing. It was a gateway, a conduit to an ancient, potent force. But it was perilous. The energy possessed a volatile, unpredictable nature. She sensed the lurking shadows, drawn to the burgeoning power, biding their time to strike. One afternoon, while attempting to conjure a protective ward, the energy careened out of control. A maelstrom of dark energy erupted from the ground, twisting and contorting like a sentient entity. Lyric cried out, raising her arms in defense. In an instant, Kale lunged forward, shielding her with his own body. The dark energy slammed into him, sending him spiraling backwards into the unforgiving trunk of a tree. He collapsed to the earth, uttering a pained groan. Lyric raced to his side, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Kale, are you unharmed?" He struggled to sit upright, his face ashen. "I'm all right," he rasped, yet the pain etched into his eyes was undeniable. "You fool!" she exclaimed, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and profound fear. "What were you even thinking?" "I wasn't about to let it harm you," he said, his voice hoarse with pain. Lyric stared at him, momentarily robbed of speech. For the first time, she witnessed a genuine vulnerability in his gaze, a willingness to offer himself up as a sacrifice for her well-being. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. He averted his gaze, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Because I owe you." "Owe me?" she echoed, tinged with disbelief. "You owe me a lifetime of amends, Kale. You owe me the life we were deprived of." He met her gaze once more, his eyes saturated with a deep, unyielding sadness. "I know," he said softly, his voice laden with regret. "And I am sorry, Lyric. I am so deeply sorry." Tears welled in her eyes, blurring her vision. She yearned to unleash a torrent of recriminations, to inflict upon him the anguish she had carried for so long. Yet she couldn't. Not now. Not when his pack, and perhaps the fate of the world, hung precariously in the balance. She drew a deep breath, forcing herself to regain composure. "We can't afford to squabble," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We need to collaborate. We need to unlock the secrets of controlling this power." He nodded, his gaze locking with hers, his resolve hardening. "What is it you require of me?" Lyric hesitated, her mind racing. She knew what she had to do. She had to trust him, had to allow him access. "I need you to touch me," she said, her voice quivering slightly. "I need you to help me focus." From the infirmary doorway, the cloying blend of medicinal herbs and harsh disinfectants assaulted Kale's senses, a stark contrast to the forest floor's rich tang he yearned for. But the woods, his sanctuary, were defiled, ailing. And Lyric she shone like a solitary star in the encroaching gloom. He'd witnessed her relentless efforts all night, her features drawn yet resolute, her hands moving with an innate grace despite the weariness etched around her eyes. She breathed vitality back into shivering pups, cooled the burning foreheads of hardened warriors, and even offered a wan smile to Ilara, whose fear hung thick in the air. He noted how the wolves responded to her ministrations, their bodies relaxing, a confidence blooming that he hadn't seen in days. A confidence he himself had failed to inspire. A sharp, unfamiliar ache, akin to self-reproach, knotted in his stomach. He'd been dismissive, twice over. He'd prioritized tribal politics, adherence to rigid custom, the expectations foisted upon him, over the undeniable magnetism, the scorching jolt he'd felt at their initial touch. He'd branded it a weakness, the dangerous distraction. Now, watching her champion his pack, safeguard his people, he recognized it for what it truly was. Resilience. A quality he currently lacked. Torin materialized beside him, his expression mirroring Cale's concern. She hasn't relented, Torin observed quietly, his gaze riveted on Lyric. Barely touched food since her arrival. Cale grunted, his tone gruff. She's committed. Torin arched a brow, a glint of wry amusement dancing in his eyes. Committed? Is that your sole assessment, Cale? I see a woman investing every fiber of her being in our salvation. A woman you spurned. Cale recoiled inwardly, the words striking him like a physical blow. I made decisions I deemed best for the pack. He knew the pronouncement rang hollow, reeking of self-preservation. Did you, truly? Torin challenged, his voice hushed. Or did you make the decisions you thought would portray you in the most favorable light? The unwavering, impervious alpha, incapable of being swayed by, what was your term? Sentimentality? Torin shook his head, his tone burdened by a weariness Cale hadn't detected before. Sentimentality is sustaining those pups, Cale, not raw strength, not shrewd politics. Cale remained taciturn, his jaw clenched. He could offer no counter-argument to Torin, not anymore. He had fixated so intently on preserving his persona, fulfilling his prescribed role, that he'd forfeited something irreplaceable, something essential. And now that sacrifice stood before him, striving to preserve all he valued. She's remarkable, Cale conceded at last, the syllable tasting like ash in his mouth, possessing a strength I sorely underestimated. Torin clapped him firmly on the shoulder, a rare display of fondness. Then demonstrate it, Cale. Show her you recognize it. It's not too late to salvage a modicum of respect, even if you don't deserve it. The burden of his past actions weighed heavily upon him, nearly crushing him. He had inflicted pain, deep pain. He had damaged her pride, eroded her trust. How could he presume she'd offer forgiveness? How could he even solicit her assistance, knowing the wounds he'd created? He found Lyric outside, leaning against the gnarled trunk of an ancient oak, her eyelids closed, her face wan in the filtered sunlight. Even in her depleted state, she exuded a quiet force, an inherent strength that humbled him. He lingered, uncertain how to approach, how to begin bridging the gulf he had carved between them. He drew a long breath, bracing himself. He had to make the attempt. He owed her that much. Lyric, he began, his voice hushed, scarcely audible. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a fleeting instant, he glimpsed the girl he remembered, the girl who had regarded him with unwavering adoration. But it was swiftly obscured by a guarded reserve, a meticulously erected barrier that both shielded her and kept him at arm's length. Cale, she acknowledged, her tone flat, bereft of inflection. He took a step closer, his heart hammering against his ribs. I wish to express my gratitude, he started, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. For all you're doing. For the sake of the pack. She gave a curt nod, her focus locked on a point beyond his shoulder. He swallowed thickly. And I wanted to offer my apologies. Her eyes snapped back to his, a spark of something indecipherable flickering within their depths. Apologies? She echoed, her voice tinged with disbelief. For the manner in which I treated you, he stammered, his face flushing with shame. For rejecting you, on 2 separate occasions. It was an error. a grievous one. The silence stretched between them, thick and oppressive, broken only by the whisper of leaves rustling in the breeze. He waited, his breath suspended, bracing himself for the anger, the resentment, the scorn he knew he justly deserved. But it didn't manifest. Instead, she emitted a sigh, a weary, resigned sound. "It's inconsequential now, Cale," she murmured softly. "It's consigned to the past. We have more pressing concerns demanding our attention." He shook his head, his voice laced with profound regret. "It does matter, Lyric. It matters to me. I caused you harm. And I am genuinely sorry. I was blind, driven by fear. I allowed my sense of duty to distort my judgment, and I made the wrong choice." He reached out, almost instinctively, to make contact, to take her hand, but restrained himself, his fingers hovering uncertainly in the space separating them. He had forfeited that right. "I am aware that my apology cannot undo the damage," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I know I cannot erase what transpired, but I hope you might at least believe that I regret my actions, that I comprehend the enormity of my misdeeds." Her gaze softened imperceptibly, a flicker of something akin to understanding surfacing in her eyes. "I believe you, Cale," she said quietly. "But belief alone does not rewrite history. It doesn't mend the fractures." "I know," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "But perhaps it represents a beginning." She studied him intently for a prolonged moment, her expression inscrutable. Then she averted her gaze, her focus fixed on the horizon. "We have a demanding task ahead," she stated, her voice devoid of feeling. "Let us concentrate on that." He knew it wasn't absolution. Not yet, but it was something. A fissure in the wall she had so meticulously constructed. A glint of respect, perhaps, forged through suffering and remorse. And within that glint, he discovered a spark of optimism, a hope that perhaps, just perhaps, they might discover a pathway to collaborate, to restore the pack's health, and ultimately to repair the wounds that divided them. He knew it would necessitate time, unwavering effort, and a willingness to confront the specters of their shared history. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he felt a glimmer of hope. He had Ed, committing significant blunders, but he was prepared to confront them head-on, to glean wisdom from them, and to regain the trust he had so recklessly squandered. He would begin by honoring her boundaries, acknowledging her capabilities, and respecting her strength, without expecting anything in return. He would demonstrate through his actions that he was deserving of her assistance, and perhaps, one day, deserving of her forgiveness. Into the lair the witch's forest exhaled venom. Contorted boughs snagged at the overcast sky, and a saccharine aroma, thick enough to taste, assaulted Lyric's senses. Ahead, Cale's wolf-honed instincts were plainly on edge. Briefly shifting at the tree line to sample the air and soil for echoes of Morwin's craft, he now wore a mask of hard resolve. "Deceptions," he murmured, his voice a bare thread against the susurrus of the woods. "She'll prey on our deepest fears." Lyric tightened her grip on her staff. It pulsed warmly against her palm, a comforting vibration against the encroaching dread. "Then we fight fire with ice, offer her nothing." A sentiment far easier voiced than executed. Each darkening hollow seemed to morph, to assume the guise of past torments. The arthritic roots of ancient trees mimicked reaching talons, emerging from the loam. Lyric inhaled slowly, anchoring herself to the present, battling the tendrils of doubt clawing at her control. They pressed onward for what felt like an age, the oppressive miasma intensifying. The vibrant moss of the forest floor yielded to a detritus of brittle leaves, their crunching a somber counterpoint to their footfalls. Then, the assault began. A phantom flicker at the periphery, a distortion of the very air. Liam, his countenance, youthful and unsullied by the embitterment that defined his final years. He smiled, beckoning her closer. "Lyric," the phantom breathed, his voice a caress. "Come home, little star." A pang resonated through her. So long since she'd heard that timbre, felt that siren call. She reached out, her fingers ghosting through empty space. The apparition fractured, dissolved into nothing. Cale halted. Beside her, brow furrowed. "What apparition did you see?" She shook her head, striving to dispel the clinging haze. Nothing concrete, just a trace of memory. He didn't interrogate, but she saw concern etched in his gaze. He was privy to her history. He knew the wounds Liam had inflicted. He even knew his own contribution to the scars. The woods, it seemed, relished their vulnerabilities. The next illusion ambushed Cale. Lyric watched him reel, his hand shooting to his head as if fending off a physical blow. Righting himself, his face had paled, his eyes reflecting a depth of anguish she had never previously witnessed. "They're expiring, Cale." A voice reverberated through the trees, a chorus of fading cries. "You abandoned them. You were unable to shelter them." He roared, raw agony incarnate, and launched himself at a nearby tree, rending the bark with his bare flesh. Lyric darted to his side, seizing his arm, attempting to wrest him from the hallucination. "Cale, it's not reality. It's a mirage." He registered nothing, his eyes glazed over, lost within the phantasm Morwin had summoned. She tightened her hold, channeling her own life force into him, striving to shatter the enchantment. "Cale, observe me." Her voice, forceful and clear, finally pierced the veil. He blinked, his focus returning to her face. The torment in his eyes gradually ebbed, replaced by a spark of recognition. "Lyrica," he rasped, his voice grating. I beheld them gone." She enveloped him in a fierce hug, offering wordless solace. "It was unreal. You exist. We exist. We will end her." He recoiled, his posture defeated. "She understands my levers. She knows what haunts me." "And we understand hers," Lyric countered, her tone resolute. "We are aware of her weaknesses. We simply need to expose them." Their journey resumed, marked by heightened vigilance and an acute awareness of the insidious forces surrounding them. The illusions escalated in frequency and intensity. They confronted specters of past failures, of promises unfulfilled, of opportunities squandered, each a finely honed dart, purpose-built to erode their resolve, to fracture their unity. Finally, they emerged into a clearing. Dominating the space was an immense oak, its boughs reaching skyward like osseous fingers. At its base, a vortex of churning energy emitted a dark radiance. "The Nexus," Cale intoned, his voice somber. "This is the font of her power." As they neared the tree, the earth began to shudder beneath their feet. The air crackled with static, and the vortex amplified, casting grotesque silhouettes across the clearing. Then, a voice resonated through the woods, frigid and mocking. "Salutations, Cale. Welcome, Lyric. I anticipated your arrival." Morwin materialized from behind the tree, her gaze ablaze with malignant delight. Her frame was even more emaciated than Lyric recollected, her skin pulled taut over her skull, her hair a matted tapestry of black and gray. "You came to thwart me?" she screeched. "How sentimental. But you're too belated. The blight has sunk its tendrils deep. Your kin will suffer. They shall all suffer." Cale advanced, his fists clenched tight. "It needn't unravel this way, Morwin. Release them. Terminate this." She guffawed, a rasping, jarring noise. "Terminate it? Do you suppose I can merely terminate it? After your deeds towards me? After their deeds towards me? Nay, you shall atone. You shall all atone." With a flick of her wrist, she unleashed a wave of eldritch energy, propelling them both backward with tremendous force. Lyric collided with a tree, the impact stealing her breath. Cale crashed to the earth, groaning in agony. Morwin raised her hands, and the vortex surged, engulfing the clearing in a pall. "Now, let's assess if you are disposed to sacrifice for one another." Two figures manifested before them, veiled in shadows. Lyric recognized them instantly. Her parents, bound to makeshift stakes, their faces twisted in terror. "Elect Cale," Morwin hissed. "Deliver Lyric's parents, or your pack. However, you can only elect one." Cale stared at the apparitions, his visage a study in torment. Lyric understood his inner conflict. His pack constituted his charge, his sacred duty. Yet her parents, they were blameless. They did not merit this fate. "Abstain from this, Cale," Lyric entreated, her voice shredded. "Do not surrender your pack for my sake. They are dependent on you." He offered no reply. He simply stood there, frozen, paralyzed by the impossible choice. "Time ebbs, Cale," Morwin goaded, her voice laced with venom. "Render your verdict." Lyric shut her eyes, steeling herself for the inevitable. She divined his coming choice. He was obliged to make it. Yet, even with that understanding, a shard of her still held on to hope then. His voice cut through the silence. It was subdued, yet firm. "I elect neither." Morwin gaped at him, her eyes widening in incredulity. "Inconceivable?" Cale advanced, his gaze locked on Morwin. "I shall not indulge your game. I shall not allow you to compel me to select between innocent lives. There exists an alternative." He swiveled towards Lyric, his eyes begging for understanding. "I demand your trust." She studied him, probing his face for any hint of deception. She discovered nothing, only anguish and regret and an unyielding resolve. Hesitantly she nodded. "You have my trust." Cale took a steadying breath and raised his hands, channeling his life force into a protective bulwark. The shield enveloped them both, deflecting Morwin's onslaught. "Lyric, now!" he bellowed. "We have to fracture the vortex. It's the kernel of her strength." Lyric nodded and gathered her essence, drawing on every fiber of her being. She raised her staff and directed it at the swirling vortex. A beam of pure light erupted from the staff, striking the vortex with a thunderous report. The vortex pulsed erratically, flickered, and detonated in a cascade of sparks. Morwin shrieked, clutching at her head in agony. Her power began to wane, the illusions dissipating, the shadows receding. The clearing gradually lightened, the oppressive miasma lifting. As Morwin's scream devolved into a ragged whimper, the figures of Lyric's parents vanished. The wave of relief that broke over Lyric was nearly crippling. Cale's gamble had paid off. He'd defied Morwin's twisted manipulations and unearthed an alternative path. Yet the conflict remained unresolved. Morwin retained a perilous power, fueled by years of bile and animosity. She glared at them, her eyes burning with hate. "You have not triumphed," she spat. "This marks merely the advent." She lunged at them, her hands extended, her fingers contorted like claws. Cale intervened, shielding Lyric from the assault. Morwin's nails grazed his arm, leaving a seething mark. He cried out in agony, stumbling back. Lyric shoved him back, stepping to face Morwin. "This madness ends now," she said, her voice laced with ice. Your season of Morwin's eyes burned like embers, fixed on Lyric. A guttural incantation ripped from her throat, the air thickening with a palpable darkness. It wasn't a physical attack, not precisely. It was something far more insidious, a spell woven from shadows and whispered insecurities, designed to unravel Lyric from the inside out. "Worthless," Morwin hissed, her voice echoing with the pain of centuries. "Always second best." "Unwanted," Lyric staggered, her breath catching in her throat. Images flickered behind her eyes, her brother's vacant stare. The dismissive glares of pack members, echoes of a life lived on the periphery. The air grew cold, each whispered accusation finding its mark, burrowing deep into the raw places within her. Cale saw it happen, the subtle shift in Lyric's posture, the flicker of pain in her eyes. He didn't understand the intricacies of Morwin's magic, but he recognized its effect. Without conscious thought, he moved, throwing himself in front of Lyric as a wave of dark energy crashed against him. The spell slammed into Cale, a searing cold that burned like ice. He grunted, the impact stealing the air from his lungs. It felt like shards of glass were embedding themselves in his skin, each one whispering doubts and regrets the faces of the pack members he'd failed, the weight of his responsibilities, the memory of every harsh word he'd ever spoken. But beneath the pain, a fierce protectiveness roared to life. He would not let Morwin break Lyric. Not again. He staggered, his legs threatening to buckle. Lyric reached out, instinctively, her hand grasping his arm to steady him. Her fingers brushed against the bare skin of his forearm, and a jolt, sharp and unexpected, surged through them both. It wasn't just the physical contact, though that was undeniably potent. It was something deeper, a spark of the bond they had once shared, rekindled by the shared trauma and the raw, desperate need to protect one another. Their eyes met, held. His were dark with pain, but also with a fierce determination that mirrored her own. Hers were wide with shock, with a fragile hope that she had long tried to extinguish. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed, the sounds of the forest fading into a dull hum. It was just them, suspended in a bubble of shared history and unspoken longing. Cale's grip tightened on her hand, his thumb tracing a slow, unconscious circle on her wrist, dangerously close to the pale scar that marked her as his rejected mate. A silent question hung in the air, a question neither of them dared to voice. Could they ever truly move past the pain, the betrayal? Was there any chance of salvaging what they had lost? Morwin cackled, the sound shattering the fragile connection between them. "How touching," she sneered. "But sentimentality will be your undoing. He rejected you twice, little healer. Do you really think he cares now? He only needs you." Lyric flinched, Morwin's words hitting like a physical blow. She pulled her hand away from Cale, the sudden absence of his touch leaving her feeling strangely cold and exposed. He had rejected her, twice. The memory still stung, a raw wound that refused to heal. "I don't need anyone," Lyric said, her voice trembling slightly. She straightened her shoulders, forcing a mask of composure over her face. "I'm here to stop you, Morwin, not to rehash old mistakes." She turned her attention back to the witch, focusing on the swirling vortex of energy that pulsed at the center of the clearing. It was time to end this, regardless of the confusing emotions swirling within her. She had a job to do. Lives depended on it. Cale watched her, his expression unreadable. He knew he had hurt her, deeply. He had made choices he regretted, choices driven by fear and a misguided sense of duty. Wanted to reach out to her, to explain, to beg for forgiveness. But the words caught in his throat, choked by the weight of his past actions. "Lyric," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Be careful. That spell." "I know what it is," she snapped, cutting him off. "I can handle it." She didn't want his concern, not now. Not when his touch still sent shivers down her spine, when his gaze still held the power to unravel her carefully constructed defenses. She needed to focus, to remain detached. Allowing herself to feel anything for Cale would only make her vulnerable, and vulnerability was a luxury she couldn't afford. But as she faced Morwin, she couldn't shake the memory of Cale's body, shielding hers. The feel of his hand on her arm, the brief, intense connection that had flared between them. The mark on her wrist throbbed, a constant reminder of the bond that refused to be broken, no matter how hard she tried to deny it. The rejection still burned, but so did something else. A flicker of hope, a whisper of possibility. And that, she realized with a sinking feeling, was the most dangerous thing of all. Confidants. The air in Ilara's cabin, a blend of wood smoke and soothing chamomile, offered scant comfort against the electric unease thrumming through Lyric. The floorboards groaned a weary lament beneath her pacing. "I don't get it, Ilara." One breath, I'm poised to rip him apart, the next to drown in Echo's coat. Of what might have been, of a path not taken. Ilara observed her, a serene island amidst Lyric's storm. By the crackling hearth, her hands rested easily in her lap. The heart clings to what the mind seeks to bury, Lyric. It's obstinate that way. Lyric halted, pivoting to meet her friend's gaze. But it's madness, Ilara. He spurned me. Twice. He made his bed. So why this persistent connection? Why won't it just dissipate? Her fingers strayed to her wrist, tracing the ghost of silver beneath the cuff. Cale's brand, a perpetual, dull ache, signifying a link he'd rejected. A true bond defies easy severance, Lyric, especially one consecrated by Luna, Ilara murmured. It can be ignored, stifled, even disavowed, but rarely extinguished entirely. Lyric slumped into a chair facing Ilara, firelight dancing in her pupils. So, what am I supposed to do? Disregard it? Feign indifference while he stands before me, desperate for aid? All while I'm battling this magnetic pull? She shuddered, a torrent of conflicting sensations threatening to overwhelm her. Yearning, resentment, apprehension, a volatile cocktail. That resolution rests solely with you, Lyric, Ilara responded, her tone gentle yet firm. But be unflinchingly honest with yourself. What is your true desire? Lyric scoffed, a brittle laugh escaping her. What I craved. Him, Ilara. A life intertwined, a shared pack. He wouldn't have it. He chose obligation, custom some warped ideal of an alpha over us. The word felt like grit in her mouth. And now? Ilara pressed, her gaze unwavering. Lyric hesitated, the silence thickening between them. Now I'm lost. Part of me still yearns for that, for him. That connection undeniable. But another part recoils in terror. The dread of renewed pain, of fresh rejection, the prospect of ceding that kind of power to him. Again. Ilara gave a slow nod. Fear holds considerable sway, Lyric, but it can also obscure what lies ahead. Cale made his choices then, dictated by the man he was. But people evolve, Lyric. Circumstances shift. He stands here, soliciting your assistance. That speaks volumes in itself, or merely reflects his predicament, Lyric countered, skepticism coloring her voice. He desires something from me. End of story. Perhaps, Ilara conceded. Yet even if that holds true, it doesn't diminish the affinity between you. It doesn't erase the mark upon your wrist, or the emotions within your heart. She reached out, clasping Lyric's hand. You possess resilience, Lyric. You weathered his rejection. You forged a new existence, a new community. You are not the woman he dismissed. You wield strength now, both internally and over this situation. Lyric squeezed Ilara's hand, her gaze softening. But what if I lack the strength to confront this again? What if I succumb to renewed hope, only to have my heart shattered anew? The vulnerability in her voice lay raw and exposed. Then you will endure that as well, Ilara affirmed, her voice ringing with conviction. You are a survivor, Lyric. It courses through your veins, resides in your very core. You will mourn, you will recover, and you will emerge fortified. But you mustn't allow fear to dictate your path. You must discern your true desire, and then either fight for it or walk away, secure in the knowledge that you acted in your own best interest, irrespective of him. Lyric closed her eyes, Ilara's counsel resonating deep within her. The fire crackled, painting the walls with dancing shadows. She conjured Cale's image, the ache in his eyes, the desperation lacing his plea. She felt the brand on her wrist, a perpetual reminder of a bond that refused to break. When she opened her eyes, her gaze held a newfound clarity, a stronger resolve. I require space, Ilara. Time to ruminate, to feel, to decipher my true desire. I refuse to let my past dictate my future, yet I cannot simply disregard it. Ilara nodded, releasing her hand. Take all the time necessary. But remember, Lyric, time is a rare treasure. Cale's pack suffers. The blight spreads. You cannot afford to remain paralyzed by fear indefinitely. Lyric rose to her feet, the weight of her decision bearing down. I understand. I'll find my answer. I always do. A weak smile flickered across her face, a spark of hope ignited within. The road ahead remained veiled in darkness, but for the first time in what felt like an age, she perceived a glimmer of light, a possibility of something beyond mere survival, a chance for healing, for absolution, perhaps even contentment. But first she had to, quote, face the specters of her past and determine if she dared venture into the light. Emerging from Ilara's cabin, the cool night air assaulted Lyric's face, a welcome slap that chased away some of the mental haze. The moon held court in the heavens, a silent confidant to her inner conflict. Her gaze drifted toward the pack house, a distant beacon of warmth and unity. Cale awaited there, expectant, needy, and she, despite her reservations, felt drawn to him as surely as a moth to a flame. Drawing a deep breath, the scent of pine and damp earth filled her lungs. She faced a choice, a decision poised to determine not only her future, but the fate of Kale's pack. Down. She knew evasion was no longer an option. She had to confront her anxieties, acknowledge her history, and decide once and for all if she dared risk her heart once more. The mark on her wrist pulsed faintly, a silent frisson, testament to the enduring link, a connection that held both the promise of untold joy and the specter of devastating anguish. She turned toward the pack house, her steps firm, her resolve solidifying with each stride. The shadows of the past still lingered, but tonight they seemed less formidable, less potent. Tonight, she was ready to fight. Divided loyalties, the waning sun painted the training grounds in ochre hues as Kale approached. The scarred earth, testament to Ironwood's warrior lineage, stretched out before him. Torrin stood like a granite statue, shoulders knotted with tension as he observed the pack's younger members sparring. Without turning, he growled, his voice a low timbre. "They're undisciplined, relying on brute force, neglecting strategy." Kale leaned against the weathered fence beside him. "They're learning. Give them time." He recognized the critique as a deflection, an attempt to sidestep the real issue festering between them. Torrin pivoted, his gaze piercing. "Are you so sure, Kale? Or are you too preoccupied to notice what's truly at stake?" Kale's jaw hardened. He anticipated this. "What are you suggesting, Torrin?" "I'm suggesting your infatuation with Lyric compromises your judgment. She rejected you twice. And now you're entrusting her with our pack's survival?" Torrin's tone dripped with incredulity. "Have you forgotten the cost of misplaced faith?" Kale's hands curled into fists. "Lyric is a healer. She's our only hope against the blight." "Is she truly? Or is this a manipulation? An attempt to prove something, or worse, to avenge herself?" Torrin's eyes narrowed to slits. "She knows your devotion to this pack, Kale. What sharper blade to wound you than its destruction?" The accusation was a stinging lash, reopening old wounds. He'd entertained the thought, however fleetingly, but he instinctively knew Torrin was wrong. "That's not her nature," Kale stated firmly. "Lyric isn't like that." "Isn't she?" "You barely scratched the surface." "You don't see her core, the one veiled beneath that stoic facade. You see only what you desire, blinded by some kind of enchantment." Torrin's voice escalated with each word. "I see compassion, a willingness to risk everything for others," Kale retorted, his tone hardening in response. "I see a strength you can't fathom." "And yes," he conceded, his voice gentler. "Perhaps I see more than that. But that doesn't negate her worth as our best chance." Torrin scoffed, a harsh, dismissive sound. "Compassion? It's a carefully crafted deceit. Remember, Kale, she walked away. She betrayed you. Us. The bond that was supposed to bind you." Kale winced, the memory of Lyric's departure a searing brand on his soul. She had her reasons. "And you know these reasons, do you?" Torrin challenged, closing the space between them. "Or are you merely excusing her? Excuses that could damn us all." Kale turned away, raking a hand through his hair. He understood Torrin's unease. To some extent he shared it, but he couldn't deny the visceral pull he felt towards Lyric, the unwavering conviction in her inherited power. "Goodness! I trust her, Torrin," he said quietly, "and I need you to trust her too. Unity is paramount to survival." Torrin remained silent for a long beat, his gaze locked on Kale. "United? Or deceived? You're the alpha, Kale. Your duty is to safeguard us, not to blindly lead us to our doom." I am protecting you, Kale said, turning back to face Torin. And sometimes, protection demands calculated risks. It requires faith, even when it's difficult. He hesitated, then confessed the secret he'd been guarding, the truth that laid bare his vulnerability. Torin, I think I'm falling for her. The admission hung in the still air, fragile and heavy. Torin's expression softened, his anger momentarily eclipsed by concern. Kale. I know, Kale interrupted, a wry smile playing on his lips. I know it's madness. I know she may never reciprocate, but I can't deny what resides in my heart. And I refuse to let my fear of rejection overshadow the reality that she might be our only salvation. Torin sighed, his shoulders sagging imperceptibly. This complicates matters. How so? Kale asked, his voice guarded. Because now, I see you not just as an alpha, but as a man consumed by love. And love can drive a man to errors that could shatter everything he cherishes. Torin paused, his voice laced with reluctant understanding. I still harbor reservations about her, Kale. But I have faith in you. If you vouch for her, I'll stand with you. But, mark my words, he added, his voice regaining its steel. Should she betray us, should she cause you harm, I will not hesitate to take action. Kale nodded, his heart burdened by the weight of Torin's words. He understood the stakes, the gamble he was taking. Yet, he couldn't abandon Lyric, not with so much hanging in the balance. Thank you, Torin, he said sincerely. It means everything. Torin clapped him on the shoulder, a rare gesture of warmth. Just tread carefully, Kale. Don't let your heart obscure the truth. He turned back toward the training grounds, his gaze once again fixed on the young warriors. They still require guidance, he murmured. And so do you. Kale watched him depart, the lengthening shadows stretching and distorting, mirroring the anxieties swirling within him. He had Torin's support, for now. But he knew that trust was a delicate thing, easily shattered, and the destiny of his pack, along with his own happiness, rested precariously on Lyric's shoulders, captured the cloying sweetness, underscored by the rusted iron tang of aged blood, announced her presence. Lyric spun, every nerve alight with alarm, yet too late. The earth contorted, gnarled roots erupting like skeletal fingers, clamping onto her ankles. A guttural incantation swelled, a vibration that resonated deep within her marrow, ushering in a sickening wave of nausea. This wasn't mere physical violence. It was a psychic violation, an assault crafted to shatter her resolve. Fragmented memories flickered behind her eyelids, faces of packmates averted, Kale's glacial indifference, the fiery kiss of the brand seared onto her wrist, an unwanted testament to a severed connection. From the encroaching gloom materialized Morwin, a viperous smile curving her lips. Well, well, healer. Did you honestly believe you could remain hidden? Her voice, a velvet rasp, dripped with venom. Such potential, squandered on those curs. Lyric fought against the constricting roots, her own magic sparking, but Morwin merely chuckled. Waste not your energy. This isn't some common tethering spell. It's a whisper dismantling your very essence. The memories intensified, a swirling vortex of anguish and remorse. She felt herself diminish, reverting to the naive girl who had offered her heart freely, the girl deemed unworthy. What do you want, Morwen? She rasped, her voice betraying her fear. What I should have claimed long ago, Morwen cooed, gliding closer. Your power, your link. You see, that pathetic alpha of yours carries a fragment of you, and you, a piece of him. A bond squandered, yet a bond nonetheless, an inequity I intend to correct. A howl tore through the atmosphere, a raw cry of desperate fury. Cale, near. Relief surged, swiftly followed by paralyzing dread. Cale couldn't contend with Morwin, not in her crippled state. He exploded into the clearing, a tempest of gray fur and gnashing teeth. He launched himself at the witch, a primal roar erupting from his depths. But, with a dismissive flick of her wrist, a barricade of thorns burst forth, an impassable wall. He crashed against it, the thorns tearing rents in his hide, unyielding in his assault. "Cale, don't!" Lyric shrieked, her plea swallowed by the wind. She watched, paralyzed, as he savaged the unyielding barrier, his gaze fixed on hers, a frantic plea etched in his eyes. Morwin's amusement was palpable, her attention riveted on Lyric. Such loyalty! Alas, too late. You should have chosen fealty to me, Alpha. I would have granted you genuine dominion. She raised her hands, dark energy crackling around her fingertips. Now, little healer, let's sever these ties and unearth the treasures within. A searing agony consumed her wrist, the brand burning with white-hot intensity. It felt as though something fundamental was being violently ripped from her core, a vital component of her being torn asunder. She cried out, a sound of raw torment. Cale roared again, a sound of utter desolation. He understood Morwin's intent. He could feel the weakening of the connection, the draining of Lyric's vital essence. Trapped, impotent to intervene, he could only witness her being devoured by the very darkness he'd vowed to shield her from. Morwin's eyes blazed with triumph. Almost, nearly there. She concentrated her power on the brand, the dark magic escalating. The visions in Lyric's mind became unbearable, a maelstrom of rejection, fear, and agony. She felt herself fading, her consciousness dissolving into oblivion. On the precipice of oblivion, a voice sliced through the darkness. A voice imbued with a strength she never knew she possessed. Her own. No. The word, a mere whisper, was enough. A spark of defiance flared within her, a refusal to break, to be consumed. She anchored herself to Cale's face, to the desperate entreaty in his gaze, to the memory of his touch, the fleeting moments of connection that had breached his stoic exterior. The brand on her wrist throbbed with renewed vigor, her own magic surging to meet Morwin's onslaught. The psychic assault faltered, the visions receding, replaced by a sense of clarity, of purpose. But the moment had passed. Morwin had achieved her aim. The bond, weakened, but rent. As Lyric's strength returned, the world spiraled, and darkness engulfed her entirely. Cale watched, transfixed by dread, as Lyric's body went limp. The thorny cage dissolved, and he surged forward, reaching for her, but Morwin was too swift. She seized Lyric, hoisting her over her shoulder like insensate baggage. "Fret not, Alpha," Morwin hissed, her eyes glittering with victory. "I shall cherish your little healer. She will be far more beneficial to me in my service than she ever was in yours." With a final derisive laugh, she melted into the shadows, Lyric in tow. Cale remained rooted to the spot, his heart a cold, heavy stone. He had failed. He had allowed Morwin to abduct her. The clearing blurred before him, a swirling vortex of verdant and earthen hues. The atmosphere thickened, oppressive, and with crushing suddenness, his wolf form succumbed to its own weight, leaving him kneeling amidst the exposed roots. He stared at the void where Lyric had stood, the echo of her scream still reverberating within his skull. Guilt crashed over him, a tsunami of remorse and self-condemnation. He had spurned her, cast her aside, disregarded the omens. And now, fueled by his arrogance, his pack stood defenseless, and Lyric was in the clutches of a monster. He had never experienced such profound, abject powerlessness. The rescue guilt, a ravenous hunger, gnawed at Cale. He couldn't shake the image of Lyric's face, the fleeting surprise giving way to dawning horror, the stark betrayal mirrored in her gaze the instant Morwin struck. His twofold rejection had greased the wheels of this tragedy. He'd spurned her, choosing tribal machinations over his own desires, and now Lyric was suffering the consequence. He stood before the Northern Ridge Pack, their faces mirroring a shared anxiety and bewilderment. The spreading corruption, the sorceress, the kidnapping events that had plunged them into disarray. Torrin Stone, his steadfast lieutenant and lifelong friend, whose devotion was as unyielding as the mountains, stepped forward cautiously. "Cale, we must tread carefully. Morwin's power is considerable. A reckless assault would be suicidal." Cale's gaze met Torrin's, an untamed fire blazing in their depths, a sight Torrin had rarely witnessed. "Careful! She has Lyric—" "Torrin!" Every precious second squandered on meticulous planning grants Morwin further opportunity to break her will. His fists clenched, the very air around him shimmering with restrained ferocity. "I erred. I cast her aside. I relinquished her. It won't happen a third time. This transcends tactics. It's about reclaiming Lyric." A ripple of hushed discourse flowed through the pack. Uncertainties remained, yet Cale's unveiled vulnerability, his raw display of emotion, resonated deeply. He had always been the epitome of the stoic alpha, the embodiment of pragmatic leadership. This blatant exposure of his inner turmoil was unprecedented, profoundly stirring. He pressed on, his voice infused with newfound certainty. "I am aware of your trepidation. Believe me, I share it. But fear must not paralyze us. Lyric has always been our shield, mending our hurts, safeguarding our own. Reciprocity demands we protect her now. We will retrieve her, even if it entails confronting Morwin directly." A brief pause allowed his pronouncement to permeate. "I will not compel anyone to join me, but understand the stakes. Failure means her demise, and the potential annihilation of this pack. We cannot afford anything less than success." Jaren, a younger member known for attunement to the unseen, trembled visibly. "The sigil, it intensifies, Alpha. Morwin's influence is growing. I can feel it." Cale placed a reassuring hand on Jaren's shoulder, his touch surprisingly gentle. "Then we must quicken our pace. We must reach her before Morwin can pervert that power to manipulate her or enslave us." His gaze swept over the individuals before him, unwavering and intense. "Who will stand with me?" An apprehensive silence hung heavy in the air. Then Torrin moved forward, his expression resolute. "I stand with you, Cale. Always have, always will." One by one, the others followed suit, their fear giving way to steely resolve. The Northern Ridge Pack, bound by their allegiance and their alpha's surprising display of humanity, prepared for battle. Their trek toward Morwin's haven was fraught with hazard. The witch had festooned the woods with snares and illusions, preying on their deepest anxieties. Cale drove them relentlessly, fueled by the mental specter of Lyric's face, by a burning need to rectify his mistakes. He sensed her presence, a faint yet persistent beacon in the deepening gloom. The mark on his wrist pulsed in unison with the cadence of his heart. He knew, with an unshakable conviction, that Morwin sought to exploit Lyric's talents, to contort her restorative gifts into instruments of destruction. He had to reach her before that metamorphosis occurred. Ultimately, they reached the sorceress's lair, a cavernous orifice in the earth, saturated with the aroma of decay and foul magic. The very air vibrated with dark energy, the sigil throbbing like a diseased organ. Kale addressed his pack. "Remain here. Secure the perimeter. I will venture in alone." Torin protested vehemently. "Kale, this is madness. You cannot possibly confront her alone." "I must," Kale replied, his voice unyielding. "This is my penance, my obligation." He turned to Torin, a glint of vulnerability flickering in his eyes. "Safeguard them, Torin. Safeguard our community." He descended into the abyss, the reek of sulfur and corruption filling his lungs. The labyrinth twisted and turned, a network engineered to disorient and crush hope. But Kale forged onward, guided by the dim, flickering ember of Lyric's life force. He located her in a vast grotto at the heart of the complex. She was fastened to a stone altar, the sinister sigil etched into the rock beneath her, exuding an oppressive aura. Morwin loomed above her, chanting in a guttural dialect, her eyes blazing with savage delight. Lyric's eyes were shut tight. "Kale," Morwin hissed, her voice like venomous spittle. "So predictably foolish. Did you truly believe you could rescue her? She now belongs to me, and her essence will amplify my own." Kale ignored her, his gaze riveted on Lyric. He observed the strain etched on her features, the subtle tremors coursing through her frame. He knew she was resisting, even in her weakened state. "Lyric," he said, his voice a gentle balm. "I am here. I am so very sorry." Morwen's laughter was a grating, shrill cacophony. "Sorry? Is that all you offer? You spurned her, cast her aside like refuse. Now, she will bear the consequence of your stupidity." "You know nothing of us," Kale countered, his voice hardening. "You cannot comprehend the connection we share." "Connection?" Morwin scoffed. "You severed that connection yourself, Kale Ironwood. You left her with nothing but a mark." Kale advanced, his eyes igniting with fury. "That mark is a symbol of her fortitude, a constant reminder of her resilience, and a testament to the bond that chains us, whether you approve or not." He lunged at Morwin, his wolf claws fully extended. The ensuing battle was savage and unrelenting. Morwin manipulated dark magic, summoning shadows and earth to assail him. Kale fought with a primal intensity born of remorse, desperation. He evaded her spells, deflected her strikes, driven solely by the need to reach Lyric. He knew he could not overpower Morwin through brute strength alone. He needed to shatter her dominion over Lyric, to sever the connection that permitted her to leech Lyric's power. He had to reignite Lyric's self-belief, to remind her of her inherent strength. He locked eyes with Morwen and spoke to Lyric as if she was standing right in front of him. "Lyric, look at me, please." He paused, and Morwen, now seeing her plan unravel, intensified her onslaught. He blocked the attack and continued. "I was a fool, blind, afraid." He dodged a blast of dark energy. "Afraid to acknowledge my feelings for you, afraid of the impact on my people. But those fears are irrelevant now. Only you matter. IT. Love you. Lyric, I have always loved you, and I will dedicate the remainder of my days proving that to you." The utterance, charged with such raw emotion, seemed to rip apart the oppressive atmosphere. The sigil flickered erratically, its malevolent power waning. Lyric's eyelids fluttered, her gaze seeking Kale's. An ember of recognition sparked within them, a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. Morwin shrieked, her grasp on her power faltering. Impossible! The bond is severed. But the bond was not severed. It was merely dormant, waiting for the catalyst of truth to reignite it. Lyric's mark began to glow, emanating a brilliant, purifying light. The light surged outwards, severing Morwin's grasp on the sigil, enveloping Cale and infusing him with renewed strength. Lyric's eyes shed their glaze of despair. They now burned with her own intrinsic power, amplified by Cale's unwavering love and faith, and the very foundation beneath Morwin's feet began to tremble. The witch shrieked again, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror as the cavern commenced its collapse around her. Cale rushed to Lyric, freeing her from the altar. He embraced her tightly, burying his face in her hair, inhaling her familiar scent. "You are safe," he whispered. "You are safe now." "You are safe now." Lyric nestled closer, her body still trembling. "I heard you," she said, her voice raspy but clear. "I heard everything." He held her even tighter, his heart overflowing with relief and overwhelming gratitude. He had almost lost her, not just to Morwin's machinations, but to his own regrettable choices. He vowed never to repeat such a blunder. As they emerged from the crumbling lair, the northern ridge pack greeted them with jubilant cries. The creeping blight that had plagued their lands started to diminish, the forest regenerating with vigor. The malevolent shadow of Morwin had been dispelled, supplanted by the promise of a brighter future. He looked at Lyric, her face radiant in the golden light of dawn, the mark on her brow, wrist pulsed faintly. A symbol of their enduring connection, a testament to the transformative power of love and the enduring strength of forgiveness. The shadows of yesterday may linger, but the atmosphere in the clearing, once choked by the stench of ozone and decay, now felt cleansed, imbued with a lightness not experienced since the blight's initial assault. Lyric, her brow furrowed with concern, tended to Ilara, applying a soothing balm of moonpetal and silverleaf to the girl's fevered forehead. Ilara's lupine spirit, a pale shadow moments before, now pulsed with renewed vigor beneath her skin, the unnatural darkness receding like a tide. Around them, the recovering pack stirred, clarity returning to their eyes, strength flowing back into their limbs. Cale remained close to Lyric, his very presence a bulwark of silent support, his eyes vigilantly following her movements. He moved with uncharacteristic delicacy, assisting where required, his powerful hands surprisingly adept at the intricate task of healing. "She'll recover," Lyric assured, meeting Cale's steady gaze. "The crisis has passed." He offered a curt nod, his expression guarded, holding back a torrent of emotions. The mark upon Lyric's wrist, once a painful brand of rejection, now resonated with a gentle, shared energy, a symbol of the connection they had desperately tried to deny, a connection that had proven their salvation. "I owe you a debt," he admitted, his voice gravelly, "for everything you've done." Lyric averted her gaze, focusing on Ilara's shallow breaths. "They needed help. I merely responded." But the statement felt incomplete, a deliberate understatement they both recognized. The very air hummed with unspoken words. The weight of past hurts and unacknowledged desires a palpable presence between them. The ensuing days unfolded in a flurry of restoration and renewal. Lyric moved among the pack, her touch offering solace, her words providing comfort. Cale, shedding the persona of the aloof alpha, labored tirelessly at her side. He sought her input, deferred to her expertise, his actions a more profound apology than any words could convey. They discovered a new rhythm, a synergy brawl, previously unseen, their movements mirroring each other as they cared for the wounded and weary. With each act of shared compassion, the barrier that had separated them eroded incrementally. As the sun began its descent one evening, staining the sky in vibrant hues of apricot and rose, Cale assembled the pack. The clearing, once a testament to devastation, now resonated with quiet anticipation. He stood tall, his shoulders squared and resolute, yet his eyes revealed a vulnerability Lyric had never witnessed before. "My pack," he addressed them, his voice clear and resonant. "We have confronted a darkness that has tested our very core. We have endured loss and emerged resilient, wiser in our understanding. But resilience and wisdom alone are not enough. We require vision." He paused for effect, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the assembled pack members. "For many years I have led you, guided by the tenets of tradition and the weight of duty. But I have come to the profound realization that tradition, unchecked, can evolve into a suffocating prison. And duty, devoid of empathy, becomes an unbearable burden. I have made errors in judgment. I have stubbornly clung to outdated practices when innovation was imperative. And I have failed to recognize the truth that lay directly before me." A murmur rippled through the assembled crowd. Cale seldom acknowledged his shortcomings. "Therefore," he continued, his voice imbued with newfound conviction, "I have concluded that the most prudent course of action is to relinquish my position as Alpha." The silence that descended was absolute. Disbelief and confusion played across their faces. Cale stepping down, an act unprecedented in their history, raising a hand to forestall the rising tide of questions, stated, "This decision was not made impulsively. I believe that Reese possesses the leadership qualities we now require. He demonstrates open-mindedness, compassion, and a deep understanding of the necessity of adapting to an ever-changing world. He will guide you with wisdom and empathy, and prioritize the needs of the pack above all else." He turned his attention to Reese, who stood at the periphery of the group, his expression mirroring profound surprise. "Reese," Cale declared, his voice ringing with sincere respect, "will you accept the mantle of Alpha?" Reese hesitated for only a heartbeat before stepping forward, his eyes shining with quiet resolve. "I accept," he avowed, his voice carrying genuine conviction. "I will dedicate myself to serving the pack to the best of my abilities, and I will honor the legacy established by Cale." Cale nodded, an immense weight visibly lifting from his shoulders. "I have absolute faith that you will," he said. He glanced toward Lyric, a silent communication passing between them. He was stepping away from the confines of expectations and obligations that had defined his existence, choosing a different path, one that would afford him the opportunity to heal, to evolve, to become the man he aspired to be. Later that evening, Lyric discovered Cale near the riverbank, the moon bathing the water in an ethereal, silvery light. Perched upon a large rock, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon, she approached cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. "They appear to be adapting well," she offered, breaking the silence. He turned to face her, his eyes glowing with a warmth that caused her breath to catch. "Reese will make an exceptional leader," he replied. "He will succeed." "And you?" she queried softly. "What are your plans?" He hesitated, then reached out and unfolded her hand in his touch sending a surge of electricity through her veins. "I don't know definitively," he confessed, "but I know I want to navigate that journey with you." Lyric's heart skipped a frantic beat. Kale. He rose to his feet, drawing her closer. I was wrong, Lyric, he declared, his voice thick with raw emotion. So profoundly wrong. I allowed duty to blind me, and fear to dictate my actions. I pushed you away, not out of indifference, but because the intensity of my emotions overwhelmed me. I feared the power you held over me, the profound impact you had on my very being. He framed her face with his hands, his thumbs gently caressing her cheeks. I am acutely aware of the pain I inflicted, and I know that I am undeserving of your forgiveness. But I am pleading for it nonetheless. I am asking for a second chance. I desire to dedicate the remainder of my existence to making amends, to demonstrating the depth of my love for you. Tears glistened in Lyric's eyes. You don't need to say those things, she whispered. But I must, he insisted. I need you to understand the truth. I love you, Lyric. I always have, and I always will. She gazed into his eyes, her heart overflowing with a torrent of emotion. The scars of the past remained, casting a lingering shadow in her memory, but they no longer defined her existence. She had endured, she had flourished, and now, standing before her, was the man she had always loved, at last ready to meet her as an equal partner. I love you too, Kale, she confessed, her voice trembling with barely suppressed emotion. But we cannot simply revert to what existed before. You must understand that. I require trust, respect, and equality. I need you to truly see me, to acknowledge me for who I am, not for who you desire me to be. He nodded, his eyes brimming with understanding. I am ready, he said. I am prepared to become the man you deserve. He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that was both tender and passionate, a promise of a future filled with love, healing, and a shared journey of growth. The mark on her wrist pulsed with warmth, no longer a symbol of rejection, but of an unbreakable bond, forged in adversity and tempered by forgiveness. They stood there for an extended period, enveloped in each other's arms, watching the moon ascend higher into the night sky. The past lay behind them, its shadows receding into the distant darkness. A new dawn was breaking, a dawn saturated with hope, promise, and an unwavering faith in the transformative power of love.